Graham Hancock from Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 says this ancient megastructure defies archaeologists. This is Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon. It is the greatest of the great houses built almost 1,000 years ago by the ancient Puebloans. And to say that they were an advanced culture compared to the other tribes around them would be an understatement.
I often wonder what it would be like to travel back in time. Today, we're doing just that, exploring Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Imagine stepping into the 12th century when this magnificent structure stood complete. But why here? In this harsh desert, Pueblo Bonito wasn't just a building. It was the heart of a complex society, a hub of culture and commerce that flourished against all odds.
We are continuing our Chaco Canyon series in New Mexico. And have you watched Graham Hancock on Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 yet? Well, Cherie and I really enjoyed it, especially the episode on Chaco Canyon. I think that's episode 5. And both Chaco Canyon and Graham Hancock have a lot of controversy around them.
So the Park Service isn't allowed to talk about the burials, right. But so they have found them here, right?
Yeah. And it's very controversial. He got caught in a big controversy, incredible controversy. More turquoise was found in that room with those burials than have been found in the rest of the prehistoric Southwest archaeological sites put together.
What was that?
The largest built structure before they started building skyscrapers in New York City.
Bonito was a building that was that took longer to structure, to put together, than the United States has been in existence.
Wouldn't it be fun if we made a village that was actually a Kiva?
Look at all the Kivas. There must be, I can't even count them all. There's so many.
That control over behavior, the control over people's response.
But there's architecture way down deep inside. He couldn't explain it.
You cannot do this by happenstance. You cannot do it by coincidence. It has to be orchestrated. Orchestration requires authority figures.
Was there any unusual features with the elite burials at all?
Well, there was a lot of disparity.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Had his DNA done and discovered that it matched the DNA of the two super guys in room 33. And most of his DNA is Mayan.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that says a lot, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, a lot of times people come in to interpret archaeology, and they're good archaeologists in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, but they don't have any experience in the desert.
Science doesn't want all the stories, right?
No.
Yeah.
Except that the smart scientists do.
This is so huge you could get lost in here.
And of course, when you think about stone buildings on the order of Chaco, you think of Mexico.
So that's one of those areas where there's lots of different interpretations, and any one of them might be right or wrong or part.
You just keep yourself open to what unfolds.
What did Graham Hancock, Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 on Netflix miss about Chaco Canyon?
Because I don't think that there is any, amongst any group, scientific or indigenous, that understands Chaco. The story of Chaco hasn't been told. I don't know if it ever will be, but it hasn't been told yet.
There's a lot of ways that people have interpreted all of these different things that are not at all relatable or practical. I'm not interested in any of those explanations. People of the past need to be studied as people. You got to make them real. You got to make them believable. So that's what I try to do.
Then there are the dark stories.
The only thing that's certain is that this is a really big deal. I think a lot of the answers are here.
Nobody even knows this is here.
They have evidence, and they dug down and they found proof.
Our culture now, with all of our technology and advances, we could not replicate this.
For the truth of what was all of this for? Why did they build these?
I'm Tom.
And I'm Cherie.
And we're enjoythejourney.live. We received thousands of comments on our first Chaco Canyon video, and no matter what you think of Graham Hancock, Chaco Canyon and Pueblo Bonito are a feat of architecture and engineering more than 1,000 years old.
Our ancestors came to Chaco Canyon, to Pueblo Bonito, guided by the stars and the wisdom of the land. This place was chosen not by chance, but by the spirits that whispered through the desert winds, calling our people to build something greater than themselves. The canyon walls held power, a sacred embrace that kept our home strong against time. Here we carved our prayers into stone, stacking each block with purpose, shaping Kivas to honor the ancestors and the forces that guide the sun and rain. Pueblo Bonito was not just shelter. It was a center of knowledge, a place where the people gathered, where ceremonies wove us into the web of all things. The rivers may have run scarce, the winters biting, but here we stood, learning the language of the earth, calling to the sky, and walking the path our spirits set before us.
And Graham Hancock and Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 had their filming cut short in Chaco Canyon, but not us. We filmed there for weeks, including interviewing local experts, including an archaeologist. So be sure to subscribe for our full Chaco Canyon series, and you can catch the videos we've already released with the link in the description and this code right here. Graham Hancock says Pueblo Bonito is an imposing labyrinth, and that the origin and function of the structure are still hotly debated by archaeologists. Where did the ancient Puebloans get the knowledge to build these amazing structures?
Welcome to Pueblo Bonito. This right here would be the grand entrance. Now imagine walls up really high. You can't see in there. It's grand. It's kind of intimidating, like, wow, there's a lot. This is powerful. So here we're gonna walk in the grand entrance.
And
it
come
opens
through and
up.
You go, oh.
Was there anything
Right?
here before?
You know, there could have been. This could be a place for stalls or booths if people are selling things or trading things. It could be a
yeah.
place where maybe
Kinda
you would get
greet
food,
people.
maybe greeters. Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't ground level here, is it? Or
No, it's above the actual plaza level.
But here, this is where you'd walk into the plaza, where there'd be all kinds of activity going on. You can see like the buildings back there where all the rooms are. There'd be probably vendors. You've got all the Kivas in here in the main area. All the little rooms over here on the side.
You want to go and find out what's the latest fashions in pottery. Maybe you're looking for a mate, you know, so let's go do the games in Chaco, you know. And solstices and equinoxes, you know, people would gather to celebrate, you know, and so that all makes sense.
This place is vast. I can't wait to show you guys more. So many mysteries to solve here.
This is one of the great Kivas. Pueblo Bonito has two. Right here is a row of rooms that was built that effectively divides the plaza in half and creates a visible solstice alignment that takes place in the center of the plaza. So effectively, by building this wall, Pueblo Bonito replaces Fajita Butte as the place where people go to see the solstice or to know that the solstice has taken place. And at Fajita Butte, only one or two people can see it because it's in that little tiny compressed area with the pieces of stone.
And then we started doing the winter solstice over at Bonito, but you had to climb on the walls to see it. And we used to have 4 or 5 people show up for it. Well, once we advertised it, then we had 35 people, and that was too many on the wall. So we checked out another place, and Kletso is another place where you don't have people that have to stand on the walls to see it. And so they come and see the winter solstice there.
Here, every person in the plaza, every person up on rooftops can see this take place and be part of the celebration. So they have drastically changed the way that this celebration takes place by creating an alignment that is visible to everyone that takes place right here in this building instead of off in a separate geological formation that's natural, that has some, you know, like this is revolutionary. This is completely different,
Bringing the community
right?
together.
And this is built around 1075. By 1100, the majority of people who lived here all year round seem to have left, and Pueblo Bonito starts operating more as an event center with a few people staying to take care of it and sort of hosting activities for the next 150 years. So Pueblo Bonito effectively stops being a village by 1100 and starts being something else. So the first 300 years of occupation, Pueblo Bonito is a village. It's a really big village. It's pretty fancy. It's very exciting. It has multiple stories when nobody else does. So there's reasons for people to come here. But then it seems like in the 1100s, the reason changes, and it's all about this alignment wall. And, you know, we're not sure why it was necessary to build 2 new great kivas, one on either side of the wall, but it does seem that this wall is a very effective divider. So it may be that this part of the village is seen as a separate village from this side, which again was never the case prior to the 1100s. But the most important factor is the original Great Kiva that dates back to the 800s is no longer here.
And there was another Great Kiva in the western plaza of Bonito that the people themselves covered up.
It's in this big blank spot over here.
Oh.
When these two were built in conjunction with this alignment wall, the original Great Kiva that had been in use for over 300 years was demolished and filled in so that it just became part of the plaza. That's a big deal. If you think about any place in the United States where you have a village that's been occupied for 300 years, and they have a little historic church and some little buildings where Washington slept and stuff like that, just imagine what would happen if the new pastor came in and said, we're going to bulldoze this, but don't worry, we're going to build a bigger one over here that has modern plumbing and electricity and stuff like that. People wouldn't have it. This is a big deal. This is a big change.
So this one was filled in?
It's underneath of this blank spot.
Why wasn't it excavated?
It was excavated, but it's been allowed to fill back in because by the 1200s it was not here anymore. So because we can't show you Pueblo Bonito in the stages of construction, the only way to let you see what it's like is to let you see what it's like at the end of the occupation, which is totally different use and totally different habitation and totally different everything than what it was 450 years earlier. But it's hard to get people to like stop being excited about it and think and realize that this isn't what it always looked like. And what you have to do to understand the transitions is break it down into these little sections and go, okay, why this? And why this at that time? And why this? And wait, what happened to, oh, it's still there, but it's down underneath.
And does this make sense?
So obviously these celebrations, these activities that are taking place periodically have something to do with religion, because look at all the Kivas. There's more than 30 Kivas in this building, and almost all of them are built after 1100. They're not part of the original floor plan. So something really big is going on. And if you kick everybody out, if you don't let anybody continue to live here except for the people who are doing maintenance every time the wind blows, the sand moves in, so you can't be empty ever. You can't be completely abandoned, because if you are, even a year later when you come back, you can't get into any of the rooms. So there has to always be somebody here taking care of things. But all these rooms are empty, except for, well, when you have lots of visitors, where are you going to put them? So now it's sort of more like a hotel and an activity area. And look at all this space, and you can have vendors, and you can have people involved in trade, and you can have different medicine men in every single Kiva doing different specialties in religious and spiritual activities. And so you can show up here having walked from a site that's, you know, on the other side of Arizona, and you can come here with your little contribution, and you can say, well, I'm having problems with fertility. And they'll say, oh, you got to go talk to that guy. But you know what? That line's really long because everybody's been trying to talk to him. So you might not want to go today. You might want to wait a few days, because he's got a lot of people to deal with already, right? So, you know, maybe you go to different ones for different purposes. Maybe some of them are regional, like we talked about at Cheshire Kettle. Maybe some of them are to help people sort of reassign themselves to new family groups and to new situations, because there's been a lot of drought and there's been a lot of movement, and people are trying to find new places to live, and they're negotiating, and they're, you know, maybe interested in things like that. And so Pueblo Bonito changes very significantly. So people who say that all the evidence is that nobody lived here, that's actually only the evidence from the last
time
period of time.
That you understand.
It's not at all the evidence from the earlier period of time. But you know, you have to go and look for that, because it's
the evidence is there.
Yeah. But it's often obscured, or those rooms are out of use, or somebody's buried in them, or you know, the roof is bad, so we don't use that section of the building anymore. Well, guess what? That's where all that information is that dates to those earlier time periods. Not out here where they're doing different things. So some pretty cool things like that.
Does this great Kiva also have 28?
This actually has 32, which is an interesting number, because so it's maybe 28 plus 4. So you have, if your lunar calendar is 28 and then you have 4 solar holidays, you would have 28 plus 4, maybe. Hard to say, Nobody knows.
Interesting.
But you can see that this one actually has more. They're a little closer together. Some of them aren't quite as evenly spaced. And then that one over there only had 4 little ones. I don't know if you noticed that when we were there, but they're all on the north side and there's just little tiny ones. So like that Great Kiva is different from this Great Kiva. They don't match. They're not, you know, there's something interesting going on with that side and that one and this side and this one. And then there's the wall in between, and you can see there's a little narrow hallway here.
Yeah.
So people could go from one side to the other, but it's not easy. It's easy to restrict it. It's easy to prevent passage if
Right.
you wanted to.
Right.
Kiva A, the larger one, had an entrance from the north, but Kiva Q, the smaller one, had an entrance from the south.
I noticed they're all a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we were over at the Kiva at Aztec, they had those little rung ladders that
Right.
went up into these
Yeah.
rooms.
Yeah.
So do you have any, what's the speculation around that?
You know, that's a really interesting one because usually the Great Kiva has one antechamber. Sometimes it has a couple of antechambers, but usually only one has a ladder access. So like this one here has a doorway with a ladder from the main antechamber, but there's a connected room on this side and on that side. And then down there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rooms that kind of go around that also look sort of like antechambers, but they don't have any ladders, right? So the question that we are looking at is, what are these rooms for? Are they related to the Great Kiva? Is there a special use? Is this maybe a series of preparation rooms? Do they create some kind of visible alignments with something? Is there supposed to be a window that's no longer there?
Are these supposed to be windows?
Well, those are not, because they're actually just an enclosed square, but there are some places where you have openings that go all the way through.
Right.
So these just are not that kind. So, you know, there's some
And
really
they dug
interesting.
deeper to know that there's nothing more lower,
Right.
and those aren't, okay.
Yeah. And of course, the Kivas are meant to be, if not underground, to give you the feeling of being underground. That's why it's so important that they're accessed by ladders, because it makes you feel like you're going underground. So there's some symbolism there that is still recognized by some of the modern day Pueblos as being sort of like being a part of Mother Earth, or being under the ground in a cave, or different things that you get explained from different people. Yeah, that this sort of approximates that.
Could they have been used also for like celebrations of like births, deaths?
Well, any of that could
Right.
be. You know, and that's the hard part, is any of that could be, but we don't know.
Boys coming of age.
Right. Probably,
Be
because that's
warriors.
really important
Yeah.
in most societies.
Yeah.
You know,
Spiritual.
coming of age
enlightenment,
rituals, healings,
healings.
different changes during a person's life that are being recognized. All of those kinds of things are incredibly important, and you find those practices extensively with groups of people who are kind of pre-colonial or something. And, you know, we still have some of that in modern day, even American and European behaviors. It's just that they're not as important anymore as they once were. But, you know, why do we have 16th birthday celebrations? Why do some teenagers get a car for their 16th birthday? It's because that is recognizing a coming of age. We don't look at it that way, but that's what that comes from. That's the original part of that.
I've walked these ancient grounds for decades, feeling the spirits of our ancestors with every step. The Kivas of Chaco Canyon, they're not just holes in the ground, you know. They're the heart of our people, the Pueblo. These circular chambers, they reach deep into the earth, connecting us to the very core of our being. When you step inside, it's like time stands still. The cool air wraps around you, and you can almost hear the whispers of those who came before. Our ancestors, they built these Kivas with such care, such precision. Every stone, every beam, it has a purpose. The Sipapu, that small hole in the floor, it's our connection to the spirit world. Now, let me tell you about the ceremonies that breathe life into these sacred spaces. The coming of age ritual, it's a powerful thing. I remember my own, so many years ago, a young man enters the Kiva as a boy and emerges as a guardian of our ways. There's fasting, prayer, and tests of endurance. But it's the moment when the elders share the sacred knowledge. That's when the true transformation happens. In the healing ceremonies, there's something else entirely. The community gathers, forming a circle of support. The air grows thick with sage smoke and the rhythm of ancient chants. Our healer, guided by the spirits of the land, works tirelessly to restore balance. It's not just about curing the body, you see, but about mending the soul, reconnecting it to the earth and our ancestors.
Did they have sweat lodges? Did they do stuff like that, or is that a different tribe?
Most of the time we see sweat lodge type activities associated with more of the nomadic and semi-nomadic groups, and particularly with, if they're social sweat lodges, particularly with a lot of the plains tribes.
The sweat lodge, a humble yet powerful structure, embodies the profound connection between humanity and the cosmos that surrounds us. As we peel back the layers of this sacred ritual, we find ourselves face to face with a microcosm of the universe itself. The carefully chosen materials, willow branches, animal hides, heated stones, each play a crucial role in creating a space where the physical and spiritual realms intertwine. The circular shape of the lodge, much like the orbits of celestial bodies, reminds us of the cyclical nature of existence and our place within it. Inside this sacred space, participants gather in unity, their voices rising in prayer and song, as the intense heat and steam purify both body and spirit, fostering a deep sense of community and spiritual renewal. The Sweat Lodge ceremony is a journey of the spirit, a connection to our ancestors, and a renewal of our bond with Mother Earth and all of creation.
But there's no reason that people were not also using that. It turns out that when you talk to Navajo folks, and a lot of the southwestern groups, including Navajos, have used sweat lodges all the way up into the historic period, a lot of times they say, you know, this is not a spiritual situation. This is just a really good way to clean dirt and blood from butchering an animal or something off of your body when you live in a desert and there's not much water. So it's nice if you're along a river, you can go jump in the river and you can have a bath in the river, but a lot of times it makes more sense to take a small amount of water and drip it onto a hot rock and create steam, and then use different types of materials to just sort of scrape the body of all of the debris. And so a lot of the sweat lodge use in the Southwest is actually literally just a good way to take a bath, and it has no spiritual connotation, whereas sweat lodges in some of the other tribal groups across the country seem to be more focused, or maybe we just haven't documented the practical use, and they seem to be more kind of oriented towards spiritual use. But we see that less here, that this is more of a practical way. So maybe they were doing something like that. And again, it may be something that we just don't know a lot about, or we haven't observed or asked the right questions. So the modern day Pueblos insist that Kivas are not strictly spiritual locations. It seems very clear from excavation evidence that they are for a period of time, and that the use of them for more everyday activities is actually associated with trying to convince the Spanish as conquerors to stop destroying the Kivas, because look how good they are for negotiations, and look how good they are for meditation, and look how good they are for these other kinds of activities that are not strictly spiritual. And they actually were so convincing on that side of things that all of the earliest Spanish missions have Kivas built into the plaza areas for the monks to use for meditation. So they were able to convince them that they have purposes other than strictly spiritual activities. And
That was
You
my
know.
next question. I was like, if you
Yeah.
could advise like somebody where a good powerful spot is for meditation. I know we can't get in there,
Right,
but
yeah.
is there a known place in this area that's really known for some powerful spiritual energy, healing energy?
I think that a lot of people enjoy finding one, and certainly I have come here a number of times, here or at Kettle, and seen people who are a yoga class, and they're just out in the plaza with their yoga mats, and they're doing, you know, an hour of spiritual thing, or drawing, or meditating, or, you know. So I think that you do find that many of these places are attractive to visitors as a spiritual location. And I think the hard part, it's easy to see this as spiritual. It's easy to come in and there's not a lot of noise and there's not a lot of activity and it's quiet and you know that it's sacred because it has been for hundreds of years with different people. And so it's easy to see this as a sacred place. What it's not as easy to see is that this is also an everyday location. This is also a village, and some days are spiritual, and all the rest of the days, there's kids running around.
Regular
and
days
there's
of
dogs
living.
barking,
Yeah.
and there's turkeys running around, and you know, there's chaos, and somebody is up here on the second floor going, hey, don't forget that we need new sandals for the kids. And,
Right.
you know, so there's like all of this activity going
Activity.
on. That's the part that sometimes is harder to imagine when you come into these abandoned sites, because there is no longer someone taking care of them. There is no longer someone making sure that you can get access into the different rooms that you might want to visit. Now it's just all up to you. So it's quiet and there's nature around, and you know, you come here at the right time of year and you get to see some kind of alignment or something exciting in the sky. It's very easy to make this spiritual.
Yeah.
The hard part is remembering that it's also practical.
I think I missed the part on how big this one was, how many rooms.
Probably, you know, there's a lot of discussion about that. Probably at least 600 rooms total. It's very hard to say because so many of them have collapsed. And 600, I think, is a realistic number. 1,000, I think, is highly fantasized and not based on anything that we can observe. But the truth is that every one of these walls where you can't see the roof could have gone up 3 or 4 more stories. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. We don't have any way to know.
This is downtown Chaco, otherwise known as Pueblo Bonito. This is like the pinnacle of the structures here. And some people would argue Kettle as well. But look at it. Look how tall these walls are, and they are not as tall as they used to be. They were built 5 stories tall over 1,000 years ago. Yes, over 5 stories tall. Can you believe it?
And they didn't take enough photographs during the early excavations. The Wetherill expedition and the Hyde expedition did a lot of photographs, and we're very lucky to have those because they were some of the earliest people coming out as researchers. But a lot of those later people coming in the early 1900s, they didn't document anything. They didn't tell us what things they found. They didn't publish anything. They didn't take pictures. They just came in and looted rooms and left with all the stuff that they liked.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, the Wetherills get a really bad rap because they're some of the earliest people, but they were some of the most respectful, and they were some of the ones who had the best relationship with the native groups that were living out here. And you didn't go do any archaeology out here without the Wetherills. They knew where everything was. And, you know, so they sometimes get talked about in a really bad way as scapegoats, but they reported to the Smithsonian. They published. There's a whole lot of people who were legitimate archaeologists who couldn't be bothered to do that stuff. So,
and at the peak of this area, how many people lived here?
it's really hard to make that kind of, and part of it is because, like we were saying, what you see here is what's left from the end of the occupation. The end of the occupation doesn't have constant, regular daily life going on anymore. I think that in probably the mid-1000s up to close to 1100 is your height of occupation, both for the whole canyon and for this site in particular. And I think that maybe you could have 5,000 people throughout the whole canyon around that time. And you would be able to generate food and trade goods. And you would be able, if you're leaning on the outliers, to provide some of that food and some of that water, bringing it to you as part of their tribute or part of their responsibility, which I believe is how it worked. You would be able to support that, but not for real long. And you certainly don't have 5,000 people in the 800s. In the 800s, I mean, you only have 2 villages that are being constructed, this one and Una Vida. So probably each of those has, 200 people living there doing all this work. And then it expands as time goes on. And so the population fluctuates because maybe some of those people get fed up with the droughts and leave. And then other people are like, oh, the Chacoans, they know what to do. Let's move there. And so they move in and they get to one of these villages and they say, we want to be part of your group. And they say, well, we do have a household that just left, so you could take their space if you want to. Maybe there's a lot of change and fluctuation in who is living here. So that's why it's hard to do population, because population over a 450-year period is
fluctuate all the time.
It's just not. It's not one number,
Sure.
And that's what makes that hard.
So apparently they have built this wall that aligns with summer solstice. So we're going to check the compass and see what it looks like. Okay. Wow. So it looks really close to east-west, although we can see that the wall at this angle kind of juts out in some places, but it is apparently supposedly aligned with summer solstice. So here we're on the southwest quadrant on the outside of this huge complex. This right here, the complex itself is shaped like a taco. It's kind of curved all the way around and then flat on the front where there's a front, used to be a front wall. So we're gonna measure to see if this is also an east-west or how it's aligned. All right. Yeah, this is east-west. South. So this wall right here is super long. It takes up almost the entire length of the plaza, or the depth. Let's call it the depth. And it's on the outside of the main plaza. So we think it held some significance. Every day at noon, the shadow completely disappears right here. So they have this completely aligned north-south.
And here is something else that Graham Hancock in Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 on Netflix missed when they were filming here in Chaco Canyon.
The holy people said to not build your home under a cliff. And there's a good reason why. Because this could happen and your home would be vulnerable.
Look at this huge rock collapse. These multi-ton boulders came crashing down on Pueblo Bonito. We believe it was in the 1940s. And it took out part of this structure, which is interesting because they're known, the ancient Puebloans, for not building next to cliffs, but they were still too close here. You can see these 5-story foot walls, and we'll get a little closer and you'll see how it just crushed them.
So this is just kind of a thing that happens throughout the canyon, but usually they fall before they get this big, so these are pretty spectacular.
And they built this path in here after that collapse, amongst these huge boulders.
So these came from up there, yet I'm seeing some evidence of like coral from the ocean, and I've seen some shrimp, but we're gonna, when we come across them, we'll make sure we get those because that's really cool. And why would there be bottom of the ocean fossils here? Anybody know?
You've got some really interesting fossils. So there's wave marks here in the sandstone. And again, this goes back to...
So that's from water?
Dinosaurs. So this is when we're at the edge of the Great Inland Sea, but it's very shallow. And so there's lots of clams, and there's lots of wave marks, like you would see if you were at the ocean.
Wow.
And there's clams all through here. And there's all through here. All these little round, see these kind of oval and round shape. All of these are fossils. They're not really clams. There's some kind of fancy name for them.
This looks like a shrimp right here. Here's a shrimp.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
There's
That might be another one right here.
Corals and stuff like that, and little worm casts that they climbed through, and yeah, there's like all this neat stuff. If you just take a moment to look at it a little more closely, you get all these neat fossils.
So there's a shell, and look, there's a lizard that's hanging out by the shell. This one, you can see if you can feel it too.
Yeah, you got like the ripples in
Yeah.
the shell are actually preserved.
You can see a lot of them up here too. Like there's a good one right there. And what are all those shiny crystal, look like ice things?
Yeah, it looks like there's some crystal in there as well.
Where did that come from?
Minerals leaching into the rocks.
Wow. And wow, the more I like get into this, I'm noticing you have to kind of be slow and like really taking your time to like really look at the details, because it's easy to miss some of these things. So down here, you can see right here, there's a shrimp right there. It looks like there may have been one here. I saw another one. Oh, right here, there's two of them that are really good. Right there and there. Oh, and this one right here. Let's see what else we can find. This is so fascinating. There's so many theories on why this is here. We'd love to hear yours.
There used to be something over there. See this area that's all crumbly? And there's a little part of it here. This used to have an impression of like a plant part.
Oh, yeah.
And see how this is? This is some kind of big leaf or something. But that part got all crumbled from kids climbing on it. So, I mean, it's very fragile because look how soft it is, right? So, people think rocks are permanent, but they're not.
No, they're not.
But yeah, I think there's some really cool little things there. Oh yeah, there's some lizards up in there.
I didn't expect them to be there. Surface level that's up there, like the ground level.
No, this is, see where all those holes are?
Yeah.
This is part of that.
Oh, wow.
A lot of times what leaves the holes behind is that there is either a shell or a pebble, or sometimes not even that, but just a mineral that's water soluble. And it's embedded in the sandstone, and then when it's exposed to the weathering, it dissolves or it falls out, and then there's a hole left behind. So these are some of the things that could have helped create those holes.
That, I believe, is a mountain boomer.
They can change color. They're a little bit like chameleons. They can go from green to
Oh,
brown.
there's another one.
One right there.
Yeah, he's pretty much matched the color of that stone.
Yeah.
The really pretty ones are definitely the mountain boomers.
Look at all the Kivas. There must be, I can't even count them all. There's so many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I can see 13 from here, from this point, but wow, I wonder how many there are. We're gonna have to find out. That's wild.
And almost all of them are built after 1100, which is really interesting because that means that most of them were added late to the site, not part of the original floor plan. There is a little bit of a kind of sketch here that kind of shows like the 800s and then as it gets bigger over time. So one of the things that's really difficult about a site like Pueblo Bonito is that we can never come here and see it the way it looked except at the end, because everything that has been added on to it over 450 years of occupation is here, and you can't imagine it not there. So it's really hard to look at a building like this and see what part of it looked like in the 800s without the rest in the way. that's one of the things that makes it hard for people. A lot of times people come in to interpret archaeology, and they're good archaeologists in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, but they don't have any experience in the desert. And so they come in and they make assumptions about things, or they forget about details that they should know better, but they've never had to think about it before with what they're used to working with. And so it's really hard to come in and look at Pueblo Bonito and say, okay, well, only this section, because that's what it was in the 800s, and then this part was added, and then this part was added, and this part was added. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So it makes it hard for us. It makes it get overwhelming, so that we want to go, oh, this thing is just so big and so impressive and so amazing. And it was for them too, but it wasn't this big because not all of this was here. A lot of this wasn't even here at all until the 11 or 1200s. And so these things get added as people continue to live and modify their space and make sense of it. But you can see the plaza down here. Pueblo Bonito is the only site that's round. It's actually a big half circle. It has a long straight wall that is an alignment wall, but instead of being against the cliff, it's on the opposite side. It's the only one where the long straight wall alignment is on the front of the building instead of the back. And that's because the back is round, so it's not in alignment. And the round floor plan is unique. Pueblo Bonito is the only one that is round. All the rest of them are a box with a wall around the plaza. Pueblo Bonito is the only one that's round. And it started that way in the 800s. So it's been that way from the beginning, which maybe means that the people who designed the building in the 800s were thinking, wouldn't it be fun if we made a village that was actually a kiva? We don't know if that's the purpose, but that's the only reason.
Because they held that so sacred,
round
so let's make our living
Kivas.
Space round.
So what if the whole building was round and the whole building was a kiva? Maybe that's where they were going with that. Nobody knows, of course.
Yeah. Or they worship the sun, the moon,
right.
round.
These things are round.
Very symbolic.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
But each site is unique. Each site is a village. Each site has a unique characteristic or time period, so it looks a little bit different. Maybe it looks similar to other things that you've gone to. Like, you'll find some interesting similarities between Aztec and Pueblo del Arroyo, because they're built at the same time and there's different components of the structure that kind of match up. So, you know, things like that can be a lot of fun. But I think that just kind of going along the sites in the canyon and getting a sense of the time periods and the changes, that's really, really important.
Again, be sure to subscribe for the full series of Chaco Canyon videos and our other ancient ruins videos. And you'll find a link with all of our current videos in the description as well.
Yeah, see, that's why we all needed to be alive 100 years ago when archaeology was really just people who went out and dug stuff up
without the regulations and control.
And, you know,
the government had to get their hands in it.
They had a lot of exciting adventures. They also damaged a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
They also took a lot of things and sold them or gave them to private collectors, and so we don't have access to any of that stuff for research purposes. People were really, really disrespectful about human remains in the past. And so that's one of the reasons why today a lot of the tribes require the Park Service to not talk about burials because they don't want people to try and find them or cause more destruction.
So the Park Service isn't allowed to talk about the burials, but so they have found them here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Each site has people buried in it. They're what we call high status burials, which means they have a whole lot of grave goods with them. And very often it's just one person in a room or in a designated area with their stuff. And so that's an expensive method, especially during times of drought. You know, if there's a drought going on and you bury someone and you give them clothes and tools and food and water, and then you seal up the room and never go in it again, that means that that person is either incredibly important to your group or very wealthy and can afford that, because during a drought, the living are the ones who need all of those things.
A huge discovery in Chaco Canyon and Pueblo Bonito that Graham Hancock missed entirely was the mysterious Room 33.
Beneath the silence of Chaco Canyon, within the shadowed halls of Pueblo Bonito, there lies a room. Room 33, a chamber of mystery, power, and untold stories. When the earth was peeled back, what lay beneath was not just history, but a revelation. The remains of a man, buried with more care than any before him, adorned with turquoise, hundreds of beads, bracelets, pendants, shimmering blue-green against the dust of time. Was he a leader? A priest? A god among men? His bones whispered of a life of power, of a role beyond the ordinary. Beside him, others were laid to rest, their bodies carefully placed. A dynasty carved into the very foundation of Pueblo Bonito.
You mentioned this Room 33. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it was where they found the high status burials.
Okay.
Now, the first archaeological dig was Richard Wetherill and George Pepper, the Hyde expedition. The Hyde brothers backed Richard Wetherill before Chaco on some of his archaeological digs. I don't know how much you know about Richard Wetherill and all.
I have heard his name. I know he was killed out there over a disagreement, and his grave is out there.
That's correct. That's correct. It's quite the story. I wish there was a movie made of it. I have it written in my head. I even have some of the cast members.
Oh, wow.
That's another story. Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, so he had guided a family out there who was interested. They were itinerant musicians. And they had heard about Bonito and wanted to go see it, and they encountered Richard Wetherill up in Mancos where he had his ranch, and he was taking people to these places and doing tours. The places at Mesa Verde that he is giving credit for having discovered or rediscovered. Anyway, they said, we heard about this Bonito, would you take us down there? He'd never been here, but he brought him down, 1895. And he went back to the Hyde brothers back east and said, hey, you backed me before. This is really something. There's this, he described it to them and all of that. Just Bonito. He wanted to dig Bonito. And so they sent him out here, but they wanted it to be a legitimate dig. So they went to the American Museum of Natural History. And there they were given a young archaeologist just out of school, as I understand it, in his 20s, never been out west, George Pepper. The old man, Putman, was too old to come out, but he sent his kid out. He and Richard didn't get along really well, but for 4 years they dug in Bonito, and one of the first rooms was in that old section of Bonito, Room 33. And there's a lot of description of that dig by Pepper. He went into the room. One description of it is its width and length and all is about the size of a queen bed, but it was a whole story, and it was all covered, of course. And so when he went in, he had to use candles, and he had to have a handkerchief with wetted across his face. He could last in there 15, 20, 30 minutes before he had to be dragged out, before he started coughing himself to death. And he was trying to measure everything and write it all down. And he does that, and he presents his paper. You can read about it. It's his account of that. Okay, and in that he found 2 burials that were almost intact, high status. 2 things can be said about that particular cache, burial, whatever you want to call it, repository of something, that sound contradictory. More turquoise was found in that room with those burials that have been found in the rest of the prehistoric Southwest archaeological sites put together.
Wow.
The second statement as they understood the importance of turquoise in Chaco, the vast majority, probably 99% of it, of the turquoise that came into the canyon was worked, turned into its product, and sent out. Whatever they called Chaco, it might have been Turquoise Canyon, whatever they called turquoise. Anyway, those high status burials gave rise to the whole speculation that these great houses were like palaces for kings, you know, whatever, big time people. And there were other small houses, but there wasn't as much evidence for those because they were totally covered over. They're single story. The small houses mostly on the south side. But there was some of that was exposed so that they knew there were these small houses. And so it was easy to say, okay, the rich people lived over here, you know, in the big palace, you know, they were the kings or whatever, you know, and the poor people lived over there. So that was one way to think about it. But as things progressed over time, over the long haul, they found not very many burials, and no burials that looked like these two in this one room. Never found that again. Now, we're not talking just Bonito now. We're talking Chaco. 60, 70,000 square miles. There's never been found another burial like that. There's been things that have been found extravagant in their way, but nothing quite like those two burials.
Yeah, you said that there was more in that one room for turquoise than has been found
in the rest of the prehistoric Southwest archaeological sites put together.
That is like,
yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, and they've sourced a lot of where the turquoise that they did find there came from, and it's all over. Cerrillos is part of it, and that's just right up here.
Okay.
You know, but then there's places around, you know, north and west. Arizona, I think, but Utah, you know, that has been some of the sources of the turquoise. What's really interesting that many people want to know that's harder to discover, where did it all go? You know, did it all go down south? You know, where did it go? You know, can we find it? Can we source it? Can we discover what went through Chaco? Is that possible?
Right.
You know,
right.
We can tell where the turquoise that came in here, that's still here, where it came from. But what about the turquoise that left here? Can we ever find evidence of it having come through here? That would be, who knows?
Was there any unusual features with the elite burials at all?
Well, there was a lot of disparity.
Okay.
You know, in truth, yeah. And when people say, what were the burials like? Well, you know, I just described those two, and they were fancy, you know, carefully laid out. But it's also said that numbers differ, but anywhere from another dozen to maybe 8 or 9 burials in that room. They were just disarticulated bones thrown in. Now, what story do you write up about that? You've got way down below one of the high status burials. Now, here's the story though. When Pepper did his study and wrote up his paper based on his measurements, he gave a certain narrative. Steve Plog, who's one of the people that did the DNA study, took his measurements and put them on a holographic depiction of that room. The measurements did not comply with Pepper's conclusions, his written description of what he was finding. He just assumed the two burials were together. Well, they were 3 feet apart. They were put in at different times.
Okay.
You know, so little things like that, you know. It wasn't that he was totally wrong, it was just that if you look at his data, which is where he got his conclusions, it doesn't match somebody else looking at the same data.
Right.
So is one of the people wrong, or is it just that his subjective experience about going into that room and making those measurements is very different from another person just taking the objective measurements and coming to a different conclusion? So I don't know what it all means, but anyway, it's a complicated story,
right,
with these disarticulated bones thrown in. You don't just, I mean, how do you explain that? It could be explained in a variety of ways. It could be a time thing, because the first burial was put in when that room was very new. That one way down below. And I can't remember if the second one was put in about the same time. I'm assuming it was. I think I would know, I would remember if it were real different. But anyway, it could be that the bones later that were all on top just thrown in, well, it might have been 2 or 3 generations later, and who cared about what the old people cared about anyway? You know, you could make up that story, you know. You could make up almost any story.
I've heard that's part of the disagreement, controversy around Chaco is because different tribes, maybe different groups came in and then left, that when you find something, it's like a snapshot in time, but it doesn't mean it was that way 100 years earlier.
Exactly. Bonito was a building that was that took longer to structure, to put together, than the United States has been in existence.
That's a great way to say that.
Because look at the changes the United States has gone through.
Right.
And we're all in whiplash right now, so you know, it's like, and so and you know, people like Steve Lexon, who have had a long haul in Chaco, put together changes that he sees in the architecture, and suggests that that could be reflective of changes in their social order also. You know, different groups coming in and gaining supremacy, whatever. Then there are the dark stories. You can't discount them.
Right.
You know, there are some things in Chaco that were probably pretty horrible. But can I say that my culture, going back to the original question about what do you think your own culture is, you know, can I say that my culture is that much different than thinking about Chaco going through those kind of changes? I mean, what if the aliens came down and found all the evidence that was clear-cut and balanced and everything for capital punishment? What would their conclusion about this country be? Based on their clear-cut, agreed-upon evidence that says we regularly put to death our own citizens in a very meticulous way. There are different methods.
Right.
But it's very ceremonial how we do it.
Right.
What would their final conclusion be about us, you know?
Right. You can make that mean a lot of different things.
Yeah. So I have a broad sense of Chaco that depending on who you talk to at any one time and when that time was, what they would say about their own culture. The Hopi have said that they were given, this is how they put it, they were given their ceremonies in Chaco. They were taken to Chaco and taught the ceremonies so that they could then go to where they are today.
I've heard it described as almost a university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that often comes up too, a place where people came to learn. And most people think, and this is probably true, that we're talking about ideas coming from outside. And of course, when you think about stone buildings on the order of Chaco, you think of Mexico.
Right.
And we know from cacao and macaws and parrots and copper bells, all these things that we know came from the South. So they really had a connection to the South, no question. I have a Hopi friend, and this is an extraordinary story, so I won't tell you his name. He had his DNA done.
Okay.
Now, he wasn't raised Hopi, but he came out of the Hopi village and then returned. And when I met him, I think it was about that time that he and his wife just moved to Hopi. It was 2 years after their marriage. I met them in Chaco my first year. And they had been married in Chaco 2 years before that. And they were living at Hopi. So he was being inculcated into the culture, whatever that means, and I couldn't begin to tell you all that meant for him. But he had his DNA done and discovered that it matched the DNA of the two super guys in room 33.
Oh.
And because that DNA had just been done, and it's very controversial, he got caught in a big controversy, incredible controversy, because they did not do the tribal consultations. Both the researchers themselves, some of whom I know, and the institutions that they were doing this under the auspices of, none of them did any consultation with the tribes about doing DNA on bones from the ancient burials, all of which should have been repatriated in 1990 after NAGPRA, but wasn't, and now they're getting caught on that.
Okay.
So, you know, it's an amazing story when you think about it. But anyway, and most of his DNA is Mayan.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that says a lot, doesn't it?
It does.
Exactly what it says now. You know, there are all kinds of stories among the people's origin stories here, and they're not consistent. There are some overlays, of course, but even in a single tribe, that's a hard word because it doesn't really work. But like, if you call Hopi a tribe, you've got several different villages. They don't all think the same. There's not a Hopi worldview. There are Hopi worldviews, you know. And anyway, and so coming from the south, they talk about going all the way down to the tip of South America. Some of the traditions of the Hopi, going all the way down, and going down today and recognizing rock art. And then they came back to where they are now. Now it's easy to, you know, that's quite a story. And if you're going to put that story forth in the Western world, you better have evidence for it. And of course, all they have are their oral traditions. When I say all they have, that's the most important to them.
Right.
And that's where NAGPRA is difficult for anyone to accept, either whether you're on the indigenous side or you're on the scientific side, because it tries to take into account everything. Oral tradition, ethnography, that sort of thing, has the same weight as archaeological hard evidence. Has the same weight. I don't remember now the details, but I think there are like 11 criteria that are all weighed, and they all have the same weight. You know, and from an archaeological point of view, they want that archaeology to have the heaviest weight, you know, and, you know, to have the day. Everything else, science, maybe a little periphery
science
stuff.
doesn't want all the stories, right?
No.
Yeah.
Except that the smart scientists do, because they understand that there's something more, you know, about this. After 100 years, I mean, by the standards of each era, pretty intense study in Chaco. 100 years, and we still can't answer basic questions, you know.
Yeah. Well, isn't it like every answer you get makes 10 more questions?
Well, it does, and it brings up other possibilities.
Right.
You know? And so the different researchers have their, you know, their line of sight, and if they didn't have their line of sight, their focus wouldn't give us the depth of study that they do give us, but it also tends to narrow their worldview. So the ones that take more into account the natives, and by, you know, even by some accounts, Neil Judd in the 20s, he talked to the older people who he was, you know, amongst, who were all the natives, and they told him a lot of things, and, you know, he listened and wrote down a lot of things. You know, some of it was kind of funny. He said there was an old man there who never went into Bonito, and Judd asked him one day, he said, "You never go inside, you know, I mean, you work out here, but, you know, you never go in." And he said, the old man said, "There's a big snake in there, it'll eat me." And Judd, you know, now what the man meant by that, I don't know, and was he pulling his leg, or, you know, we don't know. We only know that that's what Judd said, the man said to him, and so Judd's response was, "Well, I go in there all the time, I've never seen this big snake." And the old man responded, "That's because you're white." You know, he writes that down, Judd writes that down, you know. So he had conversations with people that, you know, that could be reflective of having a little more sense of, yeah, there's other worldviews here.
So you get a good view across here. The back wall is being held up because it's all original masonry. And it goes up 5 stories at this section, so you can kind of count where the roof lines are going up along there. There is some limited stabilization, but for the most part, that entire back wall is original construction. And that's why it has to be held up, because when the roofs deteriorate, there's nothing to help keep the walls upright anymore. Some of them are passageways, and some of them are living space and storage space and activity areas. What you should probably imagine is that each family, whatever that means at that time, and we don't know, has access to a series of rooms, maybe 5 or 6. Maybe the number of rooms reflects their status. Maybe it reflects how long they've had people living in that particular village. We don't know how that works at all, but each family group maybe has access to a certain number of rooms, and that could be up and down as well as side to side, and then they are not able to get into anything else. So there's areas that are public space and there's areas that are private space.
This is recent right here. This wasn't like this on one of our previous trips. So this wall has collapsed, probably from all the storms and rain that they've been getting around here. Eventually nature will win. Looks like there was some concrete in there reinforcing the top, but then you can literally see the mud and dirt as it kind of came apart as the wall fell over. Hopefully it wasn't vandalism, but that can happen too.
Lots and lots of people have stories. As you can see, sometimes when you visit, you're the only ones here. We just happen to time it exactly right. That doesn't always happen. But, you know, sometimes people can hear sounds like drumming or chanting or flute music. Sometimes it's an actual person doing it that you didn't see. But sometimes people have reported having some experiences or seeing or feeling something, or, you know, different kinds of things like that. That happens all the time. And although a lot of people would like you to believe it, it happens to everybody, not just to Native Americans. Mm-hmm. So anybody can have one of those experiences, even if you're not related to the site.
It's a human thing.
It's like the spiritual energy is left over from thousands and thousands of those celebrations or ceremonies.
Well, you know, think about, I mean, we don't have a comparison in the United States because there's no buildings that are 450 years old in the United States that are still occasionally used for activities, right? But in Europe there are, and in Europe there's cathedrals and stuff that have been used for hundreds of years. So, I mean, this site was lived in for 450 years. And there were rituals, there were activities, there were celebrations. Some of them involved people from far away. Some of them probably just involved the people who lived here all year round. And so there's, think of how many compounded activities that is. You know, of course you're gonna maybe tune into something when you visit. These are some of those walls from the 800s over here, and you can see how different they look to additions and modifications and repairs that are part of the surrounding walls from different time periods.
Yeah.
So we have about 4 different styles of masonry right in through here. Just a lot of, that one has a little staircase. It's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see it going down. Rooms that have original wood are being protected by some kind of modern drainage and roofing material.
Oh, I see. That's there to protect that wood.
That wood that's down there, yeah. And then there's a couple of those T-shaped doorways. Remember I said sometimes they're in rooms that lead onto the plaza?
Yeah.
So right here, it's a T. We only have the bottom part because the top part has deteriorated and all the wood is gone and all that. But see, there's 2, and then it goes out into the plaza. So it in a sense, if I'm right about this, that whole room, from whether you access it from this side or whether you access it from that side, is some kind of special designation.
Special room.
right? So that if we were part of the society and we were told, you know, you're not allowed to go into those rooms, we would know that you're not allowed to go into those rooms. And it does turn out that there's some pretty interesting stuff in this room. This is the room that had some cylinder jars that were tested chemically a few years ago, maybe about 10 years ago now. And it turned out that they had some kind of residue from chocolate inside the vessels. We don't know exactly what that means, and only a few of them were tested, and so there are hundreds more potentially that need to be looked at for anybody to really say anything about it. But it does tell you that there is some kind of trade with Mexico that allows the Chacoans to obtain chocolate, which we all made jokes about for years and years, but nobody actually believed that it was going to be true.
Probably the higher to do had the chocolate.
I think so. I think this is probably very elite. I think it's something that is only for people in charge or people who are special in some way.
Leaders.
You know, but remember that even the Spanish, when they first come into Mexico, they say that the Aztecs used beans. They used cocoa beans as currency.
Yeah, we heard that when we went to Costa Rica?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Costa Rica, chocolate was the food of the royalty.
And it's tropical. I mean, that's why it grows in Costa Rica and southern Mexico. It's tropical. You cannot grow it here. It doesn't matter how good you take care of it. Nobody is growing their own chocolate.
I'm going to walk between these two Kivas, and there's an entry point right here. And this is a part of Pueblo Bonito I have not been in yet. I'm gonna have to duck pretty low to get through there. And look at the original wood in here. That is awesome. And they had to haul that sometimes over 50 miles away. Looks like this was a multi-story room. Here's where the smaller logs were in here, but they've disintegrated. And then they were removed. But you can see where they were. Let's go through here. I know you guys have said don't go inside the ruins, but these are specifically made for that. I mean, there's been thousands of people through here. So they've done a little bit of reconstruction, reinforcement to keep stuff from collapsing, just what they have to. Reinforcing sometimes the top of the walls with concrete to just stop any further collapsing. But look at where we're at. It's like an ancient hallway here. Yeah, this one was at least 3 stories tall right here. All the timbers. And they are currently doing a little bit of reconstruction right now, reinforcement. So there's a few areas we can't go in. And these were interesting. They've done modifications even back in the days of the ancient Puebloans. You know, they filled in a couple areas right here. You can see how it's different. This is so huge you could get lost in here. Oh, there's one of those corner pass-throughs. Some people say those are aligned right there to some of the sun and the moon events. Pretty crazy how they could put that side window or pass-through where two walls meet in a corner compared to something like that. Oh, this is a cool spot. Look how many rooms you can see into. It's not perfectly lined up, but it's kind of a cool shot.
This would be where another story would start here. It must have collapsed. Most of the roofs are open in here. So when they were excavating it, they probably just cut these timbers along here to be able to show the entire room. But you can see that this had at least a third level, because there's another section of beams up here, and then it goes even higher.
What was that? Look at what we discovered when we were reviewing the footage to make these videos. What do you guys think it is? Is it a UAP, a UFO, something else? It's not a drone, we believe, because here's a drone that somebody else flew illegally here in Chaco Canyon.
We got somebody illegally flying a drone here. That's a big no-no. Wow, where are they flying to? Drone is back. There it goes.
And you can tell it's not white like the object I saw. It is dark, and you can see the wings. It's not a bird. It's not a plane. It was completely silent. I almost didn't catch these, so help us to, when you watch the video, to look at everything very carefully and let us know if you see anything else in our footage.
What are some of the evidence that connect Chacoans with Mesoamerica and other tribes far, far away? This T-shaped doorway shows up in many other places. We think it's meant for very important people. It's wider, easier to get through. Maybe the royalty or the elites were bigger, more well-fed, and they, as a sign of respect or acknowledgement for them, they made bigger doors. Then the common folk have to squeeze through small doors, maybe, but this is one thing that connects. The Chacoans may have got this idea from other societies down in Mexico.
So this room here does have an original ceiling. It's one of the few rooms left. When Pueblo Bonito was excavated, a lot of rooms had pieces of wood, but some of them were sawed out and taken back to camp to use as firewood because there wasn't any good brush or trees or anything around. And at that time period, they did not realize that the trees themselves were going to be instrumental in understanding time periods. Dendrochronology as a practice was invented in 1929, and Pueblo Bonito had been completely excavated by 1927. So when they went to do dendrochronology, they had to come back in to places where there was remnants of beams, but there weren't any original beams because they'd been sawed out and used for firewood, and others had decayed. So there's a few rooms where you can get inside, and this one you can go in if you want. You can go around and climb in, but it's a
We
big
were in
step
there
down.
yesterday,
Yeah.
or sorry, Monday.
Yeah. And then Aztec, of course, has a whole row of rooms that you can walk through that's got original ceilings.
Yeah.
And then the T.
And then there's a T-shaped doorway in there. Yeah. Also reconstructed. But this is not reconstructed. This is all original wood on the ceiling. It's about 1,000 years old. So it just shows that under the right conditions, these buildings can be preserved incredibly well.
You can see the different layers that they used to make the roof. You got a large beam here, main support structures, and a partial beam right there. Smaller beams, and then I can't really make that out. It's a different kind of wood that was maybe splintered in smaller pieces. Amazing. This is the most preserved roof we've ever seen. Here at Chaco, and I believe this has not had any restoration here in this room. Look at the walls.
And so where did they get the wood?
The wood comes from real far away. Yeah, not here. The trees that are best for roof construction beams are ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. Those are high elevation trees. They grow above 7,000 feet. The canyon is about 6,500 to 6,800, so they were never present here at any time. The nearest location where you can get those trees is Butte. It's about 20 miles south of us. They used up all the trees by the end of the 800s on Butte. They cut down every one that was big enough and brought it back here for the construction of the 800s period rooms here at Pueblo Bonito and the 800s period rooms at Una Vida. So then they had to go find new trees. So the next closest place is the Chusca Mountains, which is west of us, about 45 miles. And so in the 900s, they start going to the Chusca Mountains to get trees and bring them back here. Well, nobody wants to carry a tree trunk for 45 miles.
No.
But if you know how to design buildings and you have a whole series of workers who know how to build buildings because they've been doing it at a professional level, you can send them out to build villages every 5 to 8 miles. And then when you ask people to go get trees and bring them back, they don't bring them 45 miles. They bring them 5 miles and they stay overnight and somebody feeds them. And then they pick them up the next morning and they go 8 miles and then they stay overnight and somebody feeds them.
Oh my goodness.
Did I also hear that the timbers weren't allowed to touch the ground?
Yeah, I think that's
not true.
I don't think that's real at all.
Okay.
I don't even think it's realistic.
I'm just
Yeah,
like,
you definitely heard that. I think that is fantasy.
okay. I mean, all these things just sound impossible.
Yeah. They sound impossible when you look at a map. But when you understand that the sites are spaced half a day to a full day's walk apart from one another, and that a lot of them seem to be built right at the same time, that would make it very convenient to move lumber across those distances, then it starts to be a lot more possible for people who are very young and very strong. We all know what it's like to be in a house with teenagers. So, I think that there's a good option for sending all of your teenage boys out to go cut down trees and carry them back.
That's a great idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it.
And then they looked at this like time is different. So if it took 30 years, big deal, right?
Right, because we're working on this, we're only building one room at a time maybe. So we're working on this, and there's time for people to go do that. And then we're working on this other one, and there's time for people to go and do that. So I think all these things have to be orchestrated very carefully so that the right amount is happening at the right time, in the right place. And then things start showing up right as you get to this level, and you go, oh, I hope those tree cutters are going to bring me some trees. And then the next day, somebody comes into town with a couple of trees, and you go, oh, they need to go right here.
We got a spot for that.
So, yeah, I think that you cannot do this by happenstance. You cannot do it by coincidence. It has to be orchestrated. Orchestration requires authority figures. You have to have a society where there are people making decisions and planning things and other people following those orders and doing everything as it needs to happen. You can't do any of this and be successful if it's just when people feel like it or when they have time. It has to be organized.
The estimate that seems to hold water is about 214,000 logs in the canyon. Some say 16,000 of them in Bonito alone make up, made up of these logs that were carried in from outside.
And I think that's the thing that people don't really think about. They're like, oh, well, people haul lumber around all the time now. It's
Yeah,
like,
right.
not by hand.
That's right. Yeah, but they do. And, the truth is most everything had to be brought in. The only thing they found there was the material out of which they made the bricks. But those pieces of stone that they used to cut the bricks, to chip the bricks, had to be a harder stone than the sandstone. They had to bring that in from outside.
Okay.
All the cutting stones, things like the black stuff. What is it?
Charcoal?
No, not charcoal, but the
obsidian.
Glass obsidian. Yeah, obsidian. All that had to be brought in.
I don't know, maybe we touched on these windows at the other
so
site.
I mentioned it at Chetro Kettle, but there's a couple here that you can, there's one here, and then if you go around and up the side of the building about 2 rooms, there's another one you can catch there. These corner openings, they're almost always on the upper stories. They're very interesting. They're sort of built, they have to be planned in. You can't build one as an afterthought because your whole wall will fall apart.
Yeah, that had to take some thought.
Again, this is evidence that somebody is designing each building with a purpose in mind, with ideas of things like this. I think that the most likely explanation is that they're a ventilation system. There's a whole lot of people who want them to be alignment windows, and every single one of them that I've ever seen is on an interior wall. There are none of them visible to verify on exterior walls. If that is an alignment window, there has to be a window right there. Otherwise, there's no alignment.
Right. How else does the light enter the room? Yeah.
So there's no alignment unless there's a window there, and unfortunately, there's no wall, so we don't know.
Right.
I don't think they're alignment windows. I think that they're a ventilation system, and I think that's much more realistic and believable. And then this is a cardinal direction wall. So we really like things to be aligned to solstices and equinoxes, but that's not always what it is. Sometimes they're cardinal directions. So this is an east-west line across here. And I have had people who didn't believe it and got out the compass on their phone and went, oh, But pay attention when you go along here. This is all ground floor. There's no doorways. There's no way to get inside. You have to walk past this entire structure all the way down this wall to get to this entrance to be able to get inside. So that control over behavior, the control over people's response, that kind of maybe understanding of human psychology and how to manipulate it to your best interest, that is a big part of what the Chacoans are doing. And I think that they have figured some of those things out and that they're really good at using them. These big mounds over here are trash. They're probably secondary trash deposits, which means that people had trash in their house and they sort of collected it and brought it out here and threw it in a dedicated spot.
Oh.
They also have latrine rooms that they use for trash deposits.
And in some of the sites, we find that the big animals that were consumed, you'd have to go far and wide to get a lot of them. So those would be like particular feast days that they would make that kind of an effort. And so there'd be a lens in some of the trash mounds of big animal bones.
Okay.
And then everything else above that and below that was smaller stuff, and in fact not a lot of activity even, just stuff blowing in, and then another layer of activity.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought of the trash mound as like...
Oh, they're treasures.
Yeah, very important in dating and kind of seeing the order of what the population was doing.
That's right. And when Neil Judd dug into the ones in front of Bonito on the south side, he assumed that he was going to find trash, but he found stuff all mixed up. Then he didn't find a lot of organic material. He found some, but he didn't find much. He trenched it in 3 different places, I believe. Chipwells from the University of New Mexico, professor, brought his students out and they redug those trenches. Wanted to get down and see what he saw. He took pictures, he had photography, and of course his descriptions. But there's architecture way down deep inside. He couldn't explain it. So Chipwells did a redig there over, 3-4 years, I think, seasons. But anyway, when they got down inside and they found all this architecture, the whole idea changed as to what the mounds were. They weren't trash mounds. They became a little bit like that, but not much. But what they were in the beginning were trenches to handle water that flowed from the east side of Chaco Canyon. There's a big wash, or a big drainage that comes down there. They split the water.
Okay.
Some of it came around the building, Chaco Canyon, and out into a field, and another part came over to Bonito in these trenches that now are covered underneath these mounds. And then it was released into fields out further west. But then there was some great flood. Somehow the wash overflowed and destroyed that trench. And so they buried it themselves and stopped using it in that way. And then it became different things. There were stairways going up onto it, so they may have been presentation mounds also. It's hard to know exactly. And some broken pottery, and it was on some of those pieces of pottery that came from the cylindrical vessels that Chipwell's wife, Patty Crown, also a professor of archaeology at University of New Mexico, they're partners, she found the chocolate.
Right, and that's another connection to Mexico.
Yeah.
That
that was very exciting. It shouldn't have been, really. I mean, with all the other connections, of course there are connections, okay, but the chocolate was just one of those things that just fired the imagination.
Right, because it's like a delicacy for us today.
Yeah,
it's a treat.
exactly.
And to think of 1,000 years ago, that was their treat as well.
Yeah. And all the jokes about chocolate.
Right, and it's not named Chaco for chocolate.
No, probably not. I'm pretty sure of that.
So it's really important to remember some of the restrictions that existed for people doing research and for traveling around the world back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Think about how long it took before people were allowed to mention in polite society that sometimes people go to the bathroom. Or the fact that during the Victorian and Edwardian eras, women had to pretend that they weren't pregnant literally up until the moment that the baby was born.
Oh, wow.
Because pregnancy meant that somebody was having sex, and that was naughty.
Oh boy.
Even for people who were married to each other.
But then there's a baby suddenly?
Right.
Oh, so how'd that happen?
This is why the Enterprise doesn't have bathrooms, because nobody poops in space. So for people who were doing research, when they encountered rooms that had been used as latrines, as pit toilets, and when they encountered rooms that had been used for trash, they couldn't talk about that, they couldn't publish about that, they couldn't take pictures, they couldn't discuss it, because they would never get funded again. So they threw it away without telling anybody. So if you come here as a researcher and you get too excited about the architecture and you forget everything you're supposed to know as an archaeologist, you go, oh, well, nobody found any trash. So I guess there just wasn't any. It's not realistic at all. There's no place on Earth where there's no trash. People leave trash, that's what we do. We're human beings, we create trash everywhere we go, we leave it behind. That's why you have to be told to pack it in and pack it out when you go out in the wilderness, because it's not a normal thing. We don't do that. There's trash everywhere. But none of it was documented, none of it was recorded, and so people today, it's very easy to just forget about that and go, oh, right, there's just no trash anywhere. No, there's trash everywhere. This place was full of trash. They loaded it onto train cars and hauled it into the desert and threw it away because nobody wanted to look at it, because that was something that wasn't socially acceptable.
What kind of things did they have as trash?
Well, anything that's broken.
So you have all your household items. You have your tools and your pottery and your cooking supplies and your animal bones and all these kinds of things.
It's all compostable, right?
Right. So a really intelligent way to deal with it is to have pit toilets throughout your building that are sort of used socially. And then you put all of that material in there, that's organic material, and you let it kind of compost down over a period of time, and then you take it and you use it for fertilizer on your fields. And that's what it turns out that they're doing, but we didn't know anything about that until the 1970s, because that's how long it took before it was safe to publish about things that all humans do.
Like, nobody wants to talk about.
Nobody wants to talk about.
Yet there's evidence of it.
Yeah.
What about the cemeteries? Are they separate from the trash areas, or?
Sometimes people are buried in the trash. We think that probably has to do with people who die during the winter when the ground is frozen or hard to dig in, and the trash areas are warmer because they are composting, and so there are places that you can be buried in. A lot of it is probably areas that have never been explored, that are near the structure but outside of it. And you know, you have to, again, think about the constraints of that time. If somebody is giving you money to come out here and find them artifacts, are you going to waste some of that money digging over here? Or are you going to spend all of it digging over here? Not a hard thing to figure out. You're going to want to dig in the rooms where you're guaranteed to find interesting things to take home to your sponsor. You're not going to dig over here where you might find something or you might not. Nobody knows because it's just open space. Nobody was doing things that way. Nobody was doing scientific approaches to where we put holes and what we're trying to figure out until the 60s. That's when that started. So Pueblo Bonito was fully excavated by the end of the 20s.
Oh.
So there wasn't anything left.
Will they be digging any deeper to the lower levels? Are they done?
Oh no, it's all the way down.
Oh, okay.
It's all the way, yeah. The only thing left is the trash deposits out here.
The story of Chaco hasn't been told. I don't know if it ever will be, but it hasn't been told yet. But it's a living being. It's not something that just is reflective of an ancient past. It is that, but it's also so much else, and continues to be throbbing with life today. You know, and when the whole story of Chaco is told, it won't be ended with 1,000 years ago.
And if you want to meet Tori in person, check out Salmon Ruins in Farmington, New Mexico. We can't wait to check it out.
What did you find the most fascinating here at Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon? Let us know in the comments. Again, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you catch all of our ancient ruins videos, including many more videos coming out about Chaco Canyon, their great houses, and so much more to show you. And actually, you can watch one of those videos right here.